I recently posted a video called Is the Music Business Dead?, where I pointed out that as of last month, October, there had been no platinum selling albums all year. In that video, I indicated that Taylor Swift was expected to do 1 million in sales. And sure enough, here we are a few weeks later, and Swift's latest album, 1989, has already sold 1.3 million copies. Taylor Swift is now the first artist in history to sell more than 1 million albums in a single week on 3 separate occasions. A pretty remarkable feat, especially considering how lackluster record sales have been lately. Taylor Swift also made headlines for deciding to remove her entire catalog of music from Spotify as her new album was launching. During this video, I'm going to discuss Swift's decision to remove her music from Spotify, whether or not I think she was right to do so, and ultimately what this all means for all the indie artists out there who want to get exposure for their music and get paid. Here's what Taylor Swift had to say in her own words about her decision to remove her catalog from Spotify. Swift said, "If I had streamed the new album, it's impossible to try to speculate what would have happened. But all I can say is that music is changing so quickly, and the landscape of the music industry itself is changing so quickly, that everything new, like Spotify, all feels to me a bit like a grand experiment. And I'm not willing to contribute my life's work to an experiment that I don't feel fairly compensates the writers, producers, artists, and creators of this music. And I just don't agree with perpetuating the perception that music has no value and should be free." Swift goes on to say about her decision, "I felt like I was saying to my fans, if you create music someday, if you create a painting someday, someone can just walk into a museum, take it off the wall, rip off a corner, and it's theirs now and they don't have to pay for it. I didn't like the perception that it was putting forth, and so I decided to change the way I was doing things." It's important to point out that Swift's music remains available on other streaming sites like Beats Music, RDO, and Google Play All Access. Those services require a subscription for anything beyond playing artist radio stations, where you're never in control of exactly what song you hear. Spotify, in comparison, gives users on-demand access to any track in its entire catalog. This seems to imply that Swift's problem with Spotify is tied directly to Spotify's free ad-sponsored service. Scott Borchetta, the president of Big Machine, Swift's record label, said this of Spotify: "It can't be endless free. Give people a 30-day trial and then make them convert. Music has never been free. It's always cost something, and it's time to make a stand, and this is the time to do it." So what do I think about Spotify? Well, I agree with Swift. This all does seem like a big ongoing experiment, and I absolutely think artists should get paid for the music they create. But it's important to point out that historically, not that many artists ever made that much money via traditional record deals. With all this talk about how the music business is collapsing, we forget that the vast majority of artists signed to traditional record deals never really made that much money at all. There's an abundance of data online and offline that spells out just how little money artists have traditionally made from record sales. Courtney Love her or hate her, famously laid out the details of recording economics a few years back when she described how a label can make $11 million on an album and the artist is basically left with nothing. Here's what she said. "First, let's say a band gets $1 million advance to record an album. They spend $500,000 to record their album. That leaves the band with $500,000. They pay $100,000 to their manager for his 20% commission. They pay $25,000 each to their lawyer and business manager. That leaves $350,000 for the 4 band members to split. After $170,000 in taxes, there's $180,000 left. That comes out to $45,000 per person. That's $45,000 to live on for a year until the record gets released. The record is a big hit and sells 1 million copies. So this band releases 2 singles and makes 2 videos. The 2 videos cost $1 million to make, and 50% of the video production costs are recouped out of the band's royalties. The band gets $200,000 in tour support, which is 100% recoupable. The record company spends $300 on independent radio promotion. All of those independent promotion costs are charged to the band. Since the original $1 million advance is also recoupable, the band owes $2 million to the record company. If all of the million records are sold at full price with no discounts or record clubs, the band earns $2 million in royalties. Since their 20% royalty works out to $2 a record, $2 million in royalties minus $2 million in recoupable expenses equals zero. So this whole idea of the good old glory days in terms of artists making lots of money from record sales is a bit of a misconception. Certainly labels were making lots of money, but artists not so much unless they were really, really established. So what about Spotify? Well, first the good news. Spotify currently has about 50 million users, 10 million of which are paying subscribers. Spotify is still relatively small compared to services like iTunes and YouTube. Spotify pays 70% of the money they collect back to artists. They're very transparent in what they do with their money, and I really like that about Spotify. They explain right on their website exactly what they do with the money they take in and how it's distributed to artists. I'll link to that page on their site below this video. Bono, the lead singer of U2, recently came to Spotify's defense. Bono said, "The music business has historically involved itself in quite considerable deceit. But if we change that a bit and people can actually see how many times songs are being played, where they're being played, get access to information on the people who are listening to them, get paid direct debit, I think those payments will add up to something as the world gets more transparent." Spotify pays artists, albeit very little at the moment. On average, 150 streams generates about $1 per artist. Per Spotify's website, 1 million streams pays between $6,000 and $8,000. So obviously you're going to have your music streamed a lot to generate substantial income via Spotify, at least at the moment. Here's a quote from Spotify's website. Spotify is still a relatively small service with 50 million users around the world. By contrast, YouTube has 1 billion users and iTunes has over 575 million users, only about 75 million of whom pay for music. iTunes is also the preferred tool for listening to pirated music, which generates nothing for artists. When Spotify grows to even a fraction of the size of these services, for example, to 140 million total users and 40 million paying subscribers, we'll increase our total payouts by 5 times. While the royalties Spotify pays out, at the moment at least, to artists doesn't excite me, it's important to consider the alternatives. As I see it, more and more people are simply not buying music and listening to music for free on the web. Spotify has both a free version supported by advertising and a premium ad-free membership version, both of which at least encourage consumers to listen to music in a way that allow revenue to be generated and redistributed to artists. The decision by Taylor Swift and her management to remove her catalog from Spotify seemed to be based on the idea that by removing her catalog, it would encourage consumers to purchase her CD, since it wasn't available freely to stream on Spotify. And this really seems to be the crux of the issue. Will opting out of services like Spotify earn you more money? And the answer to that question, in my mind, seems to depend entirely on how established you are as an artist. If you're an established brand like Taylor Swift with a loyal fan base that already knows about you, then it makes perfect sense to me. Make it as hard as possible and as inconvenient as possible to listen to your music for free and encourage people to buy it. It's simply supply and demand economics. On the other hand, if you're not in the position of Taylor Swift, like most of us, we still need to reach people however we can, and services like Spotify are at least attempting to provide a medium where people can discover new music and generate some money. My only issue with Spotify is they need to make it harder to listen to music for free on demand and place some sort of limit on the amount of times you can listen to something without paying anything. Otherwise, what incentive do consumers have to ever pay for the music they like? I agree with Swift's team on this. So, to conclude, I like that services like Spotify are attempting to steer consumers away from totally free and illegal music and are figuring out a way to generate revenue from music listened to online. It's certainly better than people simply listening to music illegally and not generating any revenue at all for artists. But their model still needs work in order to ultimately be in the best interest of both artists and the music industry as a whole. Spotify's free tier simply doesn't generate enough revenue for artists at the moment, and since it's free for an endless period of time, consumers have little incentive to either purchase the music they like or upgrade to the premium membership, which generates more revenue for artists. I think if this issue is resolved, Spotify is at least headed in the right direction. The music industry can't stop technology and things like the internet, but we can build and promote services that provide a better experience for consumers and incentivize spending money on music. It's not called the music business for nothing.